There is a man in this story who had everything. Not just money, though there was money, more money than most people in his city had ever seen accumulate in one lifetime. Not just property, though there was property too. Buildings and land and businesses that stretched across 3 states and whose combined value, if you sat down with the right accountant and the right afternoon, would make your eyes go still for a moment before you said the number out loud. He had everything. And the question that had been keeping him awake for the better part of 6 months, the question that lived at the bottom of every glass of water he drank at 3 in the morning, and that sat at the kitchen table with him, while the house was quiet and the city outside was sleeping, was this: do my children love me? Or do they love what I have? This is a question that every wealthy parent eventually faces. It arrives quietly, the way significant questions always arrive, not with announcement, not with fanfare, but in the small moments. In the way a conversation shifts when money is mentioned. In the expression that crosses a face before the face arranges itself into the appropriate response. In the questions that are asked and the questions that are not asked, and the particular texture of silence that falls when certain subjects are approached. Chief Emeka Ogwike had 5 children. 3 daughters, 2 sons. The daughters were named Kioma, Adana, and Eber. They were 28, 25, and 22 years old respectively. They had their mother's eyes and their father's stubbornness, and something else, something that could not be attributed to genetics or upbringing or any of the neat explanatory frameworks that people use to account for character, something that was simply their own, a quality of heart that expressed itself in 1,000 small daily choices that most people made the other way. The sons were named Ikena and Chukwumeka. They were 32 and 30 respectively. They were brilliant, absolutely, undeniably brilliant, quick and sharp, and capable of the kind of social performance that impresses everyone in the room simultaneously. They had charm. They had presence. They had their father's intelligence without what their father had built that intelligence into. And for the past 8 months, they had been telling their father things about his daughters. Small things at first, observations, concerns, the kind of information that a good son brings to a father who deserves to know what is happening in his family. They had framed it as care. They had framed it as loyalty. They had said, "Papa, we are only telling you because we love you and because you deserve the truth." The truth, as they presented it, was this: Kioma, Adana, and Eber were not the women their father believed them to be. They were opportunists. They were disloyal. They were only present when the money was present. They spoke about him, so the sons said, in ways that no daughter should speak about a father. They had plans, private plans, plans that involved the estate, the businesses, the accounts. Chief Emeka Ogwike had listened to all of this. He had not believed it, not entirely. The man who had survived hunger and built a company from the ash of everything he lost was not a man who believed things simply because they were told to him. He had a mind that had been tested by harder things than his son's words. But the words had planted something, a seed of doubt, and a seed of doubt in the right conditions, in the 3 in the morning conditions, in the quiet house conditions, grows. So he made a decision. Not to confront, not to interrogate, not to do any of the things that would have been the obvious response. He made a different kind of decision. He decided to disappear. He decided to become nobody, to take off the suits and the watches and the fleet of cars, to shed the name that opened doors and the face that people recognized and the voice that boardrooms quieted for, to become, entirely and convincingly, a man with nothing. To go into the world as a beggar, genuinely dressed, genuinely hungry, genuinely walking the roads with a cup and a hope, and to see what his children were made of when they thought the money was gone. What followed was one of the most extraordinary tests a parent has ever administered to their children. What it revealed about all 5 of them, about who they were and who they were not, and what they were capable of when stripped of every advantage and every safety net, will stay with you long after this video ends. This is the story of Chief Emeka Ogwike. the wealthy man who disguised himself as a beggar. And what he found when he did. Stay right here. This story is going to teach you something about love, something about loyalty, something about the difference between the people who are with you and the people who are with what you have. Stay right here. Like this video right now if you believe that true love stays even when the money leaves. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub and ring that notification bell. We tell the stories that matter. Comment below. Have you ever tested someone to find out if they were real? Tell us what happened. His full name was Chukwuemeka Bartholomew Ogwike, but nobody had called him Chukwuemeka since his mother died when he was 9 years old, and his uncle Jude, who became his guardian, had said the name was too heavy for a boy that size and had shortened it to Emeka, and Emeka it had stayed. He was born in 1962 in Ennui, Anambra State, the same red earth, trader-blooded city that had produced generations of men and women who understood commerce the way some people understand breathing, instinctively and without formal instruction. His father, Bartholomew Ogwike Sr., had been a parts dealer, spare parts for vehicles, which in 1960s and 1970s Nigeria was a trade of genuine substance. There were always cars breaking down. There were always parts needed. Bartholomew Sr. had understood this early and had positioned himself accordingly. They were comfortable, not wealthy, not by the standards that Emeka would later redefine for the family name, but comfortable in the way that meant the school fees were paid on time, and the food was consistent, and Christmas brought new clothes rather than the repaired versions of old ones. Then his mother died. He remembered the morning clearly, with the specific sharpness that childhood grief carves into memory. He had woken to find her still in bed, unusual, because his mother was always the first sound in the morning, her movement through the kitchen, the reliable alarm clock of his childhood. He had gone to her room and found her door open and her body still and her face peaceful, and wrong in the way that faces become wrong when the person inside them is no longer there. He was 9 years old. He did not fully understand what he was seeing. He understood enough to run. His father never recovered from the loss. Bartholomew Sr., who had built his comfortable life around the presence of one specific woman, became a man who was present in body and absent in every other sense. He managed the business mechanically, without the appetite that had made it grow. He ate and slept and breathed and occasionally spoke to his son, but the engine of him had gone with his wife, and what remained was the machine without the operator. He died when Emeka was 14. Heart failure, which is what the doctors said. Emeka, who was old enough by then to understand more than the medical certificate contained, always believed his father had died of missing his mother for 5 years. Uncle Jude received the orphan boy with genuine good intention and limited capacity. He was a man of modest means with 4 children of his own and a wife, who managed the additional presence of a 14-year-old nephew with the particular tight-faced grace of a woman doing something difficult because she has no alternative. Emeka was fed and housed and schooled. These things were done. Love, or its equivalent, was a more complicated calculation. He completed secondary school on the edge of Jude's household, present but not central, cared for but not cherished. He learned in those years the particular skill of making himself useful. He did chores without being asked. He helped Jude's wife with the younger children. He ran errands and kept himself quiet and tried, constantly, to be worth the space he occupied. He was 17 when he first understood what it was to be truly hungry. Jude's business hit a difficult period. A contract that had been promised didn't materialize. A supplier who had extended credit called in the debt at the worst possible time. For 3 months, the household operated on fractions of what it needed. Emeka's uncle, proud and private, did not explain the situation explicitly, but it expressed itself in the meals. First smaller, then simpler, then occasionally absent. There was a period of 2 weeks he counted them, because hunger makes you count things when Emeka ate 1 meal a day, sometimes less. He discovered that drinking large amounts of water helped briefly. He discovered that certain types of sand, the fine, pale sand from the edge of the yard, if you let it rest on your tongue, created a sensation of something that wasn't fullness but was at least occupation, at least the feeling of something where nothing was. He never told anyone about the sand, but he never forgot it. It lived in him, that memory, as a kind of absolute reference point. There would never be a hardship in all the years that followed that he could not measure against those 2 weeks, and the measurement always came out the same way. This is not as bad as the sand. You have been further down than this. You came back from further. He finished school. He had no money for university. Jude, though not unkind about it, was clear that his own children's fees were the limit of what was available. Emeka said he understood, and he meant it. He went to Lagos. He was 19 years old. He had a bag with 4 changes of clothes, 300 naira that Jude had pressed into his hand at the motor park. Don't say I sent you with nothing. And the absolute, bone-level certainty that he was not going to die unknown. Lagos in 1981 was a city that consumed the unprepared the way fire consumes paper. Fast, complete, indifferent. Emeka arrived at the motor park at Ajota and stood for a moment in the noise and the crowd and the exhaust and the heat and the absolute democracy of a city that cared about nobody, until they had given it a reason to care. And he felt not fear but something adjacent to excitement, the specific feeling of a person who has decided to let the hardest possible road be the one they walk. He slept in a face me I face you in Mushin for the first 6 months, sharing a room with 5 other young men in similar situations, all of them in Lagos for the same reason, to find the thing that would make them worth finding. He worked loading trucks at a Papa port during the day. At night he read everything he could find, everything he could borrow. He was particularly interested in how things were built, how businesses began, the mechanism of growth from nothing to something. He read with the focused urgency of a man for whom reading was not recreation but survival preparation. In 1983, at 21, he got his first real opportunity. A trader named Alhaji Suleiman, who ran a wholesale distribution business in Lagos Island, needed someone to manage his documentation, invoices, customs paperwork, delivery records. The job paid modestly, but it was inside. It was clean, and it gave Emeka his first sustained view of how a trading business actually operated from the inside. He was thorough and he was observant, and within 8 months, Alhaji Suleiman had given him more responsibility, then more, then a salary that allowed him to move out of the Mushin room and into a place of his own. He also, in 1983, met Ngozi. Her name was Ngozi Ez. She was 20 years old. She worked as a seamstress in a tailoring shop 3 streets from Alhaji Suleiman's warehouse, and Emeka encountered her first when he needed a pair of work trousers repaired. The knee had gone, and he could not afford new ones and would not wear damaged clothes if there was any alternative. She repaired the trousers while he waited, working with the quick, certain movements of someone who has been doing this long enough for the skill to live in her hands rather than her head. She charged him 40 naira, which was fair, and when he paid her she looked up, and their eyes met with the particular mutual recognition that happens, occasionally, between 2 people who are somehow already familiar with each other despite having never met. He came back the following week, not with damaged trousers, with a perfectly intact shirt that he had deliberately stressed along one seam by pulling it sharply before entering the shop. She repaired it. She charged him 20 naira. She looked at him when she handed it back. "This shirt didn't need repair," she said. "It was falling apart," he said. "The thread you used to unstitch it is still hanging here," she said, holding up a small piece of blue thread between her fingers. He was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to see you again," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she put the thread down on the counter between them. "Come on Saturday evening," she said. "We close at 6. He came at 5:30 and waited outside. They were together from that Saturday. It was not the dramatic love of stories. It was quieter than that and more real. It was the love of two people who were both navigating difficult circumstances and who found in each other something that made the navigation less lonely. Ngozi was serious and practical and funny in the dry way of people who have seen enough of life to find its ironies entertaining rather than defeating. She had a family in Enugu who were neither wealthy nor poor and who received Emeka's visits when he eventually began making them, with the cautious but not unkind assessment of a family evaluating someone who has no name and no money but who seems at least to be trying. They married in 1986, a small ceremony. They could not afford large. Emeka had saved for a year for the bride price and the ceremony and the single-room apartment they moved into in Isle-Iko. Ngozi brought her sewing machine, her clothing, and the particular practical intelligence that she applied to everything, including the management of a household on a salary that left very little margin. In 1987, Ikena was born. In 1989, Chukwuemeka Jr. called Emeka Jr. to distinguish him from his father, though the household quickly found this insufficiently clear and eventually settled on calling the boy Eme, was born. In 1991, Kioma arrived. In 1993, Adana. In 1995, Eber, the last child, the one whose delivery cost more than anything else that year, and who arrived 3 weeks early with her father's eyes wide open, as if she had somewhere to be. They were growing, the family was growing, and the business, because Emeka had, by 1989, left Alhaji Suleiman's employ and started his own distribution operation, was growing too, though slowly, with the particular frustrating pace of something real being built properly. And then 1997 arrived. 1997 was the year everything broke. The distribution business had expanded into a warehouse, a rented space in Apapa where Emeka stored goods for 4 different importers. The arrangement was good, steady fees, reliable clients, growing volume. He had taken a loan from a cooperative to pay the first year's rent up front, securing a better rate. He had 3 employees. And then the warehouse flooded. A burst pipe undetected during a long weekend when nobody was present. 3 days of water. When Emeka arrived on Monday morning, the warehouse floor was submerged and the goods, pallets of imported electronics, rolls of fabric, boxes of hardware, had been destroyed or irreparably damaged. The losses were catastrophic. The clients were not kind. They had insurance claims of their own to pursue, and they pursued them in directions that left Emeka holding obligations he could not meet. The cooperative loan was due. His suppliers were owed money. His 3 employees were owed salaries. He lost everything. Not metaphorically. Actually, he defaulted on the loan. His assets, the car, the warehouse equipment, the modest savings were taken. He was left with the apartment which was rented and which he could no longer pay for once the savings were gone. He moved his family from Isle-Iko back to a single room in Mushin, the kind of room he had slept in at 19 with 5 men, the kind of room he had sworn he would never return to. Now he returned with a wife and 5 children. Ikena was 10, Eme was 8, Kioma was 6, Adana was 4, Eber was 2. He looked for work. He took whatever was available, loading, unloading, deliveries, running errands for a trader he knew. He ate less so his children could eat more. He slept on his side of the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling and counted the days until something changed. Ngozi was with him through the first 6 months. She was patient and she was practical, and she worked her sewing machine day and night, taking whatever alterations and repairs and small sewing jobs she could find. She fed the children. She managed the impossible arithmetic of 5 children in one room on almost no money. She was, for 6 months, everything the situation required. And then she wasn't. He had known, in the way that people who love each other know things before they are said, that she was going. There had been a shift in her, not coldness, not cruelty, but a kind of withdrawal, a gradual repositioning of herself that he had watched and had not known how to address because addressing it would have required admitting that he saw it, and seeing it would have required sitting with what it meant. She told him on a Sunday morning in March 1998. The children were asleep. She told him she was going to her mother's in Enugu. She told him it was temporary. She used the word temporary. He remembered that. She said she needed time. She needed the children to be in a more stable environment. She said she would be back when things were better. He asked what better meant. She could not say. She left with the 5 children 3 days later. Ikena old enough to understand that something was wrong, the others young enough that the disruption expressed itself as confusion rather than comprehension. Emeka stood in the empty room after they left. He stood there for a long time. Then he went to find work. He found it in an unexpected place. A civil engineering company in Victoria Island needed a logistics coordinator, someone to manage materials delivery for construction sites. The salary was modest but regular. The work was demanding but honest. Emeka took it, moved from Mushin to a small room in Surulere that was closer to work, and began the slow, grinding, day-by-day process of rebuilding. He sent money to Ngozi and Enugu every month. Not much, what he could, which was not much. He called when he could afford the airtime. He visited twice a year when he could afford the transport. The visits were formal and awkward in the way of things that have been damaged and not yet repaired. He also began noticing things. He was, in his role at the engineering company, moving through a world of materials and contracts and suppliers, and the particular economics of construction in Nigeria's growing cities. He was seeing, from the inside, how money moved in that world, where the margins were, where the inefficiencies lived, where someone paying attention could find an edge. He began paying attention. In 2001, 4 years after the warehouse disaster, Emeka approached a property developer he had been doing logistics work for and proposed an arrangement. He would manage all the developer's supply chain, materials sourcing, delivery coordination, site logistics, in exchange for a fee plus a small percentage of cost savings he could demonstrate. The developer, whose name was Engineer Obi, looked at the proposal Emeka had written, 3 pages, specific, well-researched, and said he would think about it. Engineer Obi came back 2 weeks later and said yes. The arrangement worked. Emeka found savings in sourcing, in timing, in routing that exceeded the estimates in his proposal. Engineer Obi was pleased. He referred Emeka to 2 other developers. The same proposal was accepted twice more. By 2003, Emeka had registered a company. He called it Ogwike Integrated Solutions, a name that was deliberately broad because he understood, by this point, that the business would eventually be broader than any single service. By 2005, Ogwike Integrated Solutions had 15 employees and contracts with 7 developers across Lagos and Abuja. By 2008, it had expanded into property development itself. Emeka had accumulated enough capital, through careful saving and strategic reinvestment, to develop his first small residential project, 8 units in Ibejuleki, before Ibejuleki became what it would eventually become. He sold all 8 units within 6 months of completion. By 2010, he was a millionaire. By 2015, he was something else entirely. The business had grown across real estate development, construction materials supply, and logistics. He had offices in Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt. He employed over 300 people. He owned properties in Nigeria and 2 abroad. His net worth, conservatively assessed, was in the billions of naira. Chief Emeka Ogwike was, by any definition, wealthy. And Ngozi came back. She came back in 2004, when the company was beginning to show real promise, when the salary had become stable and significant, when the single room in Surulere had become a flat and the flat had become a proper apartment. She came with the children who were older now. Ikena 17, Imeh 15, Kioma 13, Adana 11, Eber 9. She came with an apology that she delivered carefully, in the sitting room of the apartment in Surulur, while the children pretended to be doing other things in other parts of the flat. Emeka received the apology. He accepted it. He was not bitter, or he had worked very hard not to be bitter, which in practical terms produces the same results. He took his family back because they were his family, and because his children needed their father and their mother in the same house, and because, somewhere underneath everything that had happened, he still loved Ngozi in the specific, complicated way that people love each other when they have been through things together that changed them both. But something had changed, something fundamental. The trust that had existed before 1997, the unquestioning, foundational trust of two people who have decided they are in this together regardless, that trust was different now. Not destroyed, but load-bearing in a different way, weight distributed differently, cracks visible if you knew where to look. They lived together. They raised the children together. They built a life together. It was a good life in many of its dimensions. But Emeka never fully stopped remembering that when things were at their worst, she had gone. He did not speak of it. He rarely thought of it directly. But it was there in the background of everything, a reference point not unlike the sand. Something survived, something that informed, something that made him understand with a certainty that no amount of subsequent comfort entirely erased, that love and security are not always the same thing. Ngozi died in 2018 of a stroke. She was 55. It was fast. She was there on a Thursday and gone by Saturday morning. Emeka sat by her bedside for 36 hours and held her hand and spoke to her, even after the doctors said she could no longer hear him, because he needed to say the things he had not said during 20 years of reconciliation. He said he forgave her. He said he should have said it sooner. He said he was sorry for whatever he had not been, that had made leaving feel like the only option. She did not respond. She could not. But he said it anyway because the words needed to exist in the world between them, regardless of whether they were received. Ikena Ogwike was 32 years old and he was, by any external measure, impressive. He was tall his father's height, with an additional inch that he carried with the particular consciousness of someone who knows that height is a social advantage. He dressed well, not ostentatiously, but with the careful attention of someone who understands that clothes communicate. He spoke well. He had attended university. His father had ensured all 5 children went to good universities, had paid fees without complaint, had equipped them for the world with the full financial weight of someone who understood that education was the thing he had lacked and had had to compensate for manually. Ikena had studied business administration at the University of Lagos and had followed it with a master's in finance from a private university in Abuja. He worked in the family business, technically. He had an office at Ogwike Integrated Solutions headquarters in Victoria Island, a title on his business card that read Deputy Director, Strategic Development, and a salary that reflected neither the value he created nor the hours he spent creating it, because both were substantially below what the title suggested. He was charming in a way that made people feel briefly important in his presence. He was funny in the way that people are funny when they have decided that humor is useful for getting what they want. He was always there when there were things to be gained and reliably unavailable when there were things to be done. His younger brother Chukwumeka Jr., Imeh, 29, was cut from a slightly rougher version of the same cloth. Where Ikena had polish, Imeh had aggression. Where Ikena deployed charm, Imeh deployed pressure. He was the kind of person who filled rooms with his energy in a way that people found initially exciting and subsequently exhausting. He had studied economics, dropped out in his 3rd year, rejoined, completed it eventually, and had been working on and off in the family business for the past 4 years with the casual approach of someone who knows the company will not fire him regardless. Both sons had girlfriends whose primary qualification appeared to be enthusiasm for the lifestyle that proximity to the Ogwike family provided. Ikena's girlfriend was named Tulu, 26, Lagos-raised, extraordinarily beautiful in the particular way of women who have understood since adolescence that beauty is capital and have invested accordingly. She was attentive to Ikena when the Ogwike name was prominently in the conversation and subtly elsewhere when it was not. She liked the car. She liked the restaurants. She liked the way people looked at her when she walked into rooms with Ikena Ogwike. Ime's girlfriend was Precious, 25, from Warri, funny in an unguarded way that was her most genuinely attractive quality, and that was unfortunately packaged alongside a set of priorities that put financial comfort very near the top. She had told Ime, early in the relationship, and in a way she thought was charming but that was actually simply honest, "I'm not interested in suffering. If I wanted to suffer, I would have stayed in Warri." Both women would, when the time came and the circumstances changed, demonstrate perfectly what they had always been. The sons had also, over the past year, been doing something that they would have described as looking out for their father, and that was, in reality, something considerably less admirable. It had started 8 months earlier when Ikena had come to his father's study one evening. A Sunday, Emeka reading, a glass of water beside him, and had sat down with the expression of a man carrying something important. He had told his father, carefully, and with the packaging of genuine concern, that he had heard something about Kioma. Kioma, the eldest daughter, 28, a teacher in Enugu, had apparently been speaking to a lawyer. About the estate. "What kind of lawyer?" Emeka asked. "That's what I'm trying to understand," Ikena said. "I don't want to alarm you, Papa. I'm just telling you what I heard." Emeka had listened. He had received the information with the measured calm that decades of business negotiation had taught him, the calm of not allowing your reaction to become information for the person watching you react. He had also, privately, found the story thin. Kioma was a primary school teacher. She lived in a modest flat in Enugu. She sent her father small gifts on his birthday and called twice a week, and had never, in his observation, expressed any particular interest in his estate beyond affectionate inquiry about how the business was doing. The idea of her consulting a lawyer about the estate was, he turned it over carefully, as he turned over everything, not something that had any corroboration in his direct experience of his eldest daughter. But Ikena had planted it, and Ime had watered it. Over the following months, the brothers had produced a steady supply of similar information. Adana had been heard speaking disparagingly about their father's management of the business to a friend. Eber had been photographed. Ime had an actual photograph, blurry and inconclusive, in a meeting with someone who Ime claimed was a property consultant, though what this meant in context of concern about the estate he was not entirely clear about. They painted a picture, brick by brick. Not a dramatic picture, they were too intelligent for drama. A subtle picture. A picture of 3 sisters who were present and warm and apparently devoted, but who were, underneath the performance, positioning themselves. Emeka listened to all of it. He did not challenge the brothers. He did not tell them he did not believe them. He stored the information carefully, and he thought about it in the 3 in the morning hours when the house was quiet and the city outside was sleeping. And then he noticed something. He noticed that the brothers' financial requests, which arrived regularly and in various forms, some direct and some wrapped in business proposals, and some disguised as expenses that properly belonged to the company rather than its founder's sons, had accelerated in direct proportion to the amount of negative information they were providing about the sisters. Every piece of damaging information about Kioma came accompanied within a week by a request from Ikena for something, a loan against his salary, an advance on a deal he was pursuing, resources for a project that remained, somehow, perpetually in the development phase. Every report about Adana or Eber came with Ime's hand out in some new configuration. Emeka sat with this observation for several weeks. And then he made his plan. But first, before the plan, he had to understand the sons completely. Not just what they were doing now, but what had made them this way. Because Emeka Ogwike, who had spent 30 years understanding how things were built, believed that you could not properly address a problem without understanding its origin. The origin was, he concluded himself. Not in the way of blame, he had no interest in blame, but in the way of honest accounting. He had given his sons everything. He had given them education, resource, opportunity, the Ogwike name in rooms where the name opened doors. He had given them all of this before they had any experience of its absence. And the experience of absence, of hunger, of loss, of sleeping in a room with 5 strangers and eating 1 meal a day, that experience, which had been the making of him, his sons had never had. He had protected them from it. He had thought he was giving them a gift. He had been, inadvertently, depriving them of the one thing that had built his character, the knowledge that everything could be lost and that the self was the only thing that could not be. His daughters had learned differently. He was not entirely sure how, perhaps because they had spent those early years in Enugu, when Ngozi left and Emeka was rebuilding, in an environment that was more humble and more demanding than what came after. Perhaps because of something in their character that money had not yet eroded, perhaps simply because of who they were. He needed to know. He needed to know with the absolute certainty of a man who is going to make decisions based on what he finds. Decisions about the estate, about the business, about the future of everything he had built from sand and hunger and 30 years of work. He needed to see his children as they truly were. And so he made his plan. Before the test, before the disguise, before the beggar on the road, it is important to know who the daughters were, not as their father saw them, not as their brothers described them, as they actually were. Chioma Ogwike was 28 years old and she taught primary school in Enugu in a government school where the classes were too large and the resources were insufficient, and the salary arrived sometimes on time and sometimes not. And none of this had induced her to stop coming in early and staying late, and investing herself completely in the 37 children who were, at any given year, her responsibility. She had studied education at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Her father had wanted her to study business, something more directly useful to the company, but Chioma had been clear from her first year of secondary school that she was going to teach. She liked children. She was good with them. She had the particular quality of genuine attention that children respond to, because it is rarer than adults believe, and which made her classroom one of the few environments in that school where a child could feel both safe and challenged simultaneously. She lived in a 2-bedroom flat in Enugu that she shared with a colleague named Amaka. The flat was modest second-hand furniture, a refrigerator that required strategic treatment to maintain reliable function, a generator for the power cuts that she shared costs with her neighbor below. She could have asked her father for better accommodation. He would have provided it without hesitation. She did not ask. This was not martyrdom. It was a considered position. She did not want to live at a level that her own work could not sustain. She was aware that she was the daughter of a wealthy man, and she had decided quietly, without announcement, that this fact would not be the primary one. She had a boyfriend. His name was Daniel Ez. He was 30, a civil engineer at a Lagos firm who was from Nsukka originally and who had met Chioma at a mutual friend's birthday party in Enugu during one of his site visits. He was solid and serious, and had a laugh that arrived slowly but thoroughly. He had met her when he did not know who her father was. She had not told him, and he had not asked, and the relationship had been 3 months old before he encountered her father's name in a business context and put the two things together. He came to her immediately after. "Your father is Chief Emeka Ogwike," he said. "Yes," she said. "And you didn't tell me." "I was going to," He was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at him steadily. "Because I needed to know if you liked me." He considered this. "And now," she said. "Now I know I do," he said, "and also that you are quite calculating." She smiled. "My father's daughter." Daniel knew the father eventually, liked him, and was liked in return. He proposed to Kioma after 2 years, a simple, direct proposal, on the balcony of his Enugu flat, with a ring he had saved from his own salary, and which Kioma wore from that day forward with the particular care of someone who understands what the object represents beyond its material value. Adana Ogwike was 25, and she was the middle sister in every sense, positioned between Kioma's steady deliberateness and Eber's open-hearted impulsiveness. She had developed a character that combined the best of both flanking positions. She was warm without being naive, and careful without being cold. She had studied nursing at the University of Lagos and worked at a hospital in Enugu. She had returned home when the job came up, partly because she wanted to be near family, and partly because the hospital was genuinely good and the work was genuinely meaningful. She worked with patients in a way that reflected everything her profession asked of her, and then slightly more, which was the way the best nurses always work. Her boyfriend was Kelechi MBA, 27, a pharmacist, also at a hospital in Enugu, which is how they had met, in the pharmacy where she came to collect medications for her ward. He had given her the wrong drug once, not dangerously wrong, a dosage discrepancy that she caught, and had apologized with such genuine mortification that she had found it endearing rather than alarming. He was thin and slightly anxious and deeply kind, the kind of person who remembered things other people forgot: your allergy to dust, the way you take your tea, the appointment you mentioned 3 weeks ago that you were nervous about. He had been raised in modest circumstances in Anambra, and he worked hard, and he did not have money, and he had never pretended otherwise. When he learned, 8 months into their relationship, that his girlfriend's father was Chief Emeka Ogwike, he had gone quiet for several days. "What's wrong?" Adana asked. "Nothing is wrong exactly," he said. "I'm just adjusting my understanding of things." "Such as?" "Such as your father is very wealthy, and I am very not." "Yes," she said. "Does that?" he started. "Kelechi," she said, "I am a nurse. I chose a profession that pays nurses. If I wanted to be surrounded by wealth, I would have made different choices. I make choices based on what matters to me. You matter to me." He looked at her for a moment. "I'm going to meet your father eventually." "He'll like you," she said. "How do you know?" "Because you are real," she said. "He can always tell." Eber Ogwike was 22, the youngest, a final-year student at the University of Enugu studying law, which her father had been delighted about, because he understood the value of having a lawyer in the family, and because it suggested a rigor of mind that he recognized as his own. She was studying on a scholarship that the university awarded on merit, which she had received on the strength of her academic performance, and she supplemented it with a small job at a legal aid NGO that gave her practical experience and a modest income. She was lively and opinionated and read everything, and had arguments that she sometimes won against her father's lawyers, which he found both amusing and genuinely impressive. She wore her hair natural and her clothes were practical, and she had the specific energy of a person who is very interested in the world and has not yet been made tired by it. Her boyfriend was a young man named Tobena, 24, a software developer also in Enugu, who was building a small tech company with 2 friends and who was at the stage of the entrepreneurial journey that is almost entirely uncertainty with brief intervals of cautious optimism. He had very little money. He also had very clear ideas, which is sometimes worth more. He had known about Eber's father from the beginning. She had told him on their second date, because she found concealment stressful and preferred the truth as a foundation, even when the truth was complicated. He had taken it in and then said, Okay, does that change anything for you? Not unless it changes something for you, she said. He thought about it. It means, he said carefully, that you have a reference point for what life can look like when things are good, which might make the current phase of my work frustrating for you. I have a reference point, she agreed. I've also chosen my own path, which at the moment is law school and legal aid work, neither of which is going to make me rich. I'm comfortable with that. Are you comfortable with me knowing what comfortable looks like and choosing something less comfortable anyway? He looked at her. That's the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me in a relationship. Good, she said. I plan to keep being honest, it's less work. These were the three daughters. This was who they were, not the women their brothers had described, not calculating, not positioning, not performing loyalty for eventual benefit. Simply themselves, which was better than any of that. Emeka began planning in January. He was meticulous about it, the way he was meticulous about everything that mattered. He approached it like a business problem, which, in a sense, it was. He had an objective, to see his children as they truly were when they believed there was nothing to gain from treating him well. To achieve the objective, he needed to create conditions in which they would behave as they would if he were truly without resources. The first component was the rumor. He spent 2 weeks quietly and strategically circulating a story within the limited social and business circle that his children moved in. Not a dramatic story. Dramatic stories invite scrutiny. A quiet story. The story was this. Chief Emeka Ogwike had made some serious investment decisions that had not gone as planned. The business was under significant strain. There were questions about liquidity. People who depended on him financially should begin making alternative arrangements. He told this story to 3 people who he knew, with precision, would not be able to keep it to themselves. By the 3rd week of February, it had reached all 5 of his children through independent channels. He watched the responses. Ikena called him immediately. His voice was carefully modulated, concern with calculation underneath. He asked his father if there was anything he could do. He said he wanted to understand the situation. He asked specific questions about the investment portfolio and the company assets. He said he was asking because he wanted to help. Emeka listened and answered vaguely and thanked him for his concern. Emeka called 2 days later with less polish. He asked directly whether the house was at risk. He asked about the accounts. He asked whether there were steps being taken. He said, and this one Emeka noted with particular precision, that he was asking because he had his own financial planning to think about. His own financial planning, not his father's welfare. Then the daughters called. Kioma called the morning the story reached her. She asked her father if he was all right. She asked about his health. She said that money came and went, and that what mattered was that he was healthy and that whatever had happened they would figure it out together. She said she loved him. She did not ask a single question about the assets. Adana called that evening. She was crying when she picked up, not from despair, she explained quickly, from the shock of hearing unexpected news. She asked if he was eating properly. She said she had been saving a small amount every month. She mentioned the number, which was modest, and that it was his if he needed it. She meant it. Emeka could hear that she meant it. Eber called at 10 at night. She had clearly just discovered the story and had called immediately. She asked if she should come home. She said she would leave school if necessary. She said she was serious. She said, "Papa, tell me what you need. Tell me exactly what you need and I will find a way." He told all 3 daughters that he was fine, that they should not worry, that he was managing. He said this knowing that the next phase of his plan was about to begin. 2 weeks after the rumor was circulated, Emeka called a meeting with his sons and his daughters. He sat them down in the sitting room of the family house in Victoria Island, and he told them, with the steady voice of a man delivering a genuine blow, that the situation was more serious than the rumors had suggested. The business had failed. Not entirely, he had restructured it to protect some assets, but the main operating company was being wound down. The house, the Victoria Island house that they were currently sitting in, was going to have to be sold to meet obligations. He watched their faces. Ikena's jaw tightened. He asked very quickly about the other properties. Ime asked about the business accounts. Kioma reached across the sofa and took her father's hand without saying anything. Adana said, "Papa, where will you go?" Eber said, "We stay together. Whatever happens, we stay together." Emeka continued. He said he had made arrangements. He had a small house, very small, in a village in Anambra, property he had held for years that was not encumbered and that could not be seized. He had arranged for his 3 daughters to go there, to live there, while he tried to begin again. "What about us?" Ikena said. The us meant himself and Ime. "You two are men," Emeka said. "You have your education, you have your skills, you will manage." "Papa," Ime said, and something that was not quite right ran through his voice, a specific tightening that was not grief but was close to it in the wrong direction. "The company accounts." "Ime," his father said quietly, "the company accounts are not your concern." The sons left that evening in a way that was not quite storming out but was not far from it. There were words said in the corridor before they left, low enough that Emeka was not meant to hear them, about the management of the business, about decisions that had been made, about what they were and were not owed. The daughters stayed. They stayed until midnight, talking to their father, asking practical questions about what help looked like, making plans not about the estate but about logistics, who would go to Anambra first, how they would set up the house, what they would need. Kioma had a list by the end of the evening, a list of what they needed to buy, what they needed to arrange, what they needed to prepare. Emeka looked at his eldest daughter's list in the light of the sitting room lamp, after the others had gone to bed, and he felt something in his chest that was not quite grief and not quite pride, but was a combination of the two that had no clean name. He had sent them to the village house 2 weeks later. The house was small, genuinely small, 3 rooms, a modest compound, a village 20 minutes from the nearest town. It was not what they were accustomed to. They went without complaint. Kioma enrolled in a transfer position at a local school. Adana found a clinic that needed a nurse. Eber arranged to complete her final year remotely. They adapted. The sons, in the same period, experienced the removal of the financial infrastructure they had been operating inside. Their salaries from the company ceased because the company had ceased. The cards that had been linked to company accounts stopped working. The apartment allowances evaporated. Ikena called Tulu. He told her what had happened. She listened. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she needed some time to think. She sent a message 3 days later. The message said she had been doing a lot of reflection and she thought they needed space. It said she cared about him, but she was at a place in her life where she needed stability. It said she hoped he understood. He stared at his phone for a long time after reading this. Ime told Precious. The conversation was shorter. "So you have nothing?" Precious said. "Right now, yes," Ime said. "And the business is done?" "The main business, yes." She looked at him. "Ime," she said, and there was something almost kind in the way she said it, the kind of kindness that comes before very unkind news. "I can't do this. I have told you from the beginning who I am. I am sorry." She was gone within the week. The sons, stripped of the lifestyle that had been funding their choices, found themselves in a position that was new and uncomfortable, genuinely without. They had skills, education, contacts, the Agwike name, which still had some currency even in the rumor of the business's troubles. But they had never built anything with those skills. They had always operated inside a structure their father had built, taking from it rather than contributing to it. The experience was instructive. Emeka watched it from a distance. He had, by this point, begun the second phase of his plan. He became a beggar. He was thorough about it. He understood. because he had been a logistics man before he had been a property developer, and logistics was about thinking through every detail, that a convincing performance required genuine preparation. He could not walk out of Victoria Island in his usual clothes and put a cup in his hand and expect anyone to believe it. People who knew him would recognize him. People who didn't know him would see the posture of a wealthy man and not the posture of someone asking for help. He needed to transform. He spent a week preparing. He sourced clothes from a market in Oshodi, not the good market, the other market, the one where second-hand clothes were sorted into piles by condition, and where worn and faded and mismatched were the inventory rather than the anomaly. He bought trousers too short, a shirt whose color had been washed to ambiguity, a pair of shoes that had been resoled twice and whose leather was beginning to separate at the toe of the left foot. He stopped shaving. He let the gray in his stubble arrive without trimming. He stopped using the cologne that had been his daily habit for 30 years, and that anyone who knew him associated with his presence before they saw his face. He walked differently. He had, in the years of his business building, developed a walk that was recognized by people who worked for him as the walk of a man with a destination and the authority to insist on it. He practiced a different walk, smaller steps, shoulders slightly forward, the particular economy of movement that comes from carrying very little energy in reserve. He found a compound in Agege where a distant acquaintance, a man who owed him a favor, and who Emeka trusted with the specific trust of someone who knows the limit of a relationship, allowed him to stay in a room at the back. No one in the compound knew who he was. He was introduced as Mr. Emmanuel, a man fallen on hard times. He sat on the floor of the room and looked at the walls and felt, for the first time in 20 years, something that he recognized from 1997, the specific texture of reduced circumstances, the particular weight of not knowing how things would resolve, the smell of a room without air conditioning, and the sound of a city operating without reference to your needs or presence. He sat with it for 2 days, getting ready. Then on Monday morning, he put on his market clothes and his mismatched shoes and his unshaved face, and he walked out to the road. He had chosen a circuit, Lagos first, where he begged at bus stops and markets for 2 weeks to establish the performance, to let the reality of the experience settle into his body. Then he would make his way by stages to the Anambra village where his daughters were. The Lagos weeks were instructive in ways he had not anticipated. He begged at bus stops in Oshodi and Mushin. He sat with his cup at the entrance to a market in Ikeja. He spoke to no one who knew him. He was, in his market clothes and his resoled shoes and his unshaved gray stubble, a 62-year-old man who had not done well and whose presence on the street was unremarkable. This was the most surprising discovery, how completely invisible he became. As Chief Emeka Ogwike, he was visible everywhere he went. People saw him before he entered rooms. His name preceded him. His driver got out of the car and opened the door, and people on the street noticed the car before the man. He had lived inside visibility for 20 years and had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the weight of clothes you wear every day. Without it, he was nobody. Not unkindly nobody, just not seen. People looked past him the way you look past things that do not require a response. The market women did not call out to him. The bus passengers did not make eye contact. The children playing near the road played around him as if he were a stationary object rather than a person. He had not forgotten this. The sand memory made sure he never forgot what invisibility felt like, but he had not experienced it for a long time. He sat with a cup in front of him, and people gave sometimes, and did not give sometimes, and neither the giving nor the not giving was particularly personal, which was perhaps the most honest thing about it. Some people were kind. A market woman in Mushin gave him a full plate of food with genuine warmth. She looked at him with the specific assessment of a woman who has seen real hunger and recognizes it, and she said, "Eat well, Papa," and turned away without waiting for gratitude. He sat with that plate for a long time. A security guard at a Lagos Island office building shared his lunch break water with Emeka and sat beside him on the curb and told him his own story of difficulty without asking for Emeka's. He was a man who had come from Kogi seeking a better situation and who had been on the security guard's salary for 5 years and who had not given up on the better situation. He talked about his children in the village with the pride of a man who is sacrificing himself for something real. Emeka sat with this man for an hour. He said very little. He listened. When he left, he thanked the man genuinely. The man shook his hand and wished him well and went back to his post. Walking away from that conversation, Emeka thought about his sons. He thought about whether Ikena, at any point in his 32 years, had sat on a curb with a security guard and listened to his story. He thought whether Ime had ever encountered a person who was struggling and responded with the simple human gesture of sharing a bottle of water. He thought that probably they had not, and he thought about whose fault that was. On the 9th day, he began making his way toward Anambra. He went by bus, actual bus, not the kind he normally traveled by, the kind with hard seats and no air conditioning and stops at every town. He sat between a woman with a large bag of yams on her lap and an old man who fell asleep on his shoulder between Asaba and Onitsha. He let the man sleep. It was a long journey. He arrived at the outskirts of the village on a Thursday afternoon. He did not go directly to his daughter's house. He spent 2 days in the village first, begging at the market, at the church gate, at the motor park, establishing himself as a presence before the encounter he was moving toward. The village was, as small Nigerian villages are, a community where everyone was known. He was not known. This meant he was watched not hostilely, but with the alert curiosity of people who monitor the unfamiliar carefully. He was given food twice without asking by village women who saw him sitting at the roadside. He was given a corner of a shed to sleep in for 1 night by a mechanic who had a bigger heart than his circumstances would have suggested. On the 3rd day, he positioned himself at the market junction. He had his cup. He had his worn clothes. He had the posture he had been practicing for 3 weeks. He waited, and then he heard Kioma's voice. It was a Saturday morning, and all 3 sisters went to the market together. This had become their Saturday routine. In the months since they had arrived at the village house, they had settled into a rhythm that impressed Emeka when he later thought about it, with its combination of practicality and warmth. They had divided responsibilities without argument. Kioma managed the house budget, Adana managed the cooking, Eber managed the admin, the utility payments, the small bank accounts, the correspondence with the university about her remote study arrangements. They worked their respective jobs during the week. On weekends, they cooked together, went to the market together, attended the local church, visited neighbors who had been kind to them. They had made the village home, not temporarily, not in the way of people who are enduring a situation until it ends, but genuinely, with the investment of people who have decided that where they are is worth being in fully. Kioma had told Daniel, her fiancé in Lagos, that she was not sure how long the situation would last and that he should not wait if waiting was too much. Daniel had come to Enugu, redirected his travel to the village instead, arrived without announcement one Sunday, sat down at the kitchen table where Kioma was cooking and said, "I'm not going anywhere. Where is the water tap?" He had helped with the house that Sunday. He came back the following weekend. He had spoken to Kioma's father by phone, this part he did not know was part of a performance, and had said simply that he respected Chief Ogwai and that his situation did not change anything about his feelings for Kioma. He was not asking for anything. He was stating a fact. Kelechi had come to visit Adana and had spent a week in the village, sleeping on the sitting room couch, and had been so useful during that week, fixing the generator, reorganizing the kitchen storage, walking to the farm market to find better prices for their vegetables, that the sisters had quietly discussed whether he was too good to be true and had concluded that he was simply good. Tobina had video called Eber every night. He had said, "I'm in the worst phase of my company right now and you're in the worst phase of your family situation and we are both managing. We'll be fine." He had meant it matter-of-factly, without drama, which was more reassuring than any dramatic declaration would have been. The three sisters, in short, had built something in that village, something real, and their men had proven, in the manner that counts, not with words but with presence, that they were real too. On Saturday morning, they walked to the market in the order they always walked, Kioma first, Adana in the middle, Eber last, a pattern that had established itself from childhood without anyone deciding it. They carried bags. They wore simple house clothes. They were talking about something. Kioma had a problem with a student. Adana was describing a patient. Eber was countering some point with the particular relish of a law student who has found a weak argument to dismantle. They turned the corner at the market junction. And Kioma stopped. She stopped so suddenly that Adana walked into her. "Kioma, what?" Kioma did not speak. She was looking at the man sitting at the junction, sitting on a low stool with a cup in front of him, in worn clothes, with gray stubble and risoled shoes. Her father's gray stubble. Her father's hands. She had known her father's hands since she was a child, the specific shape of them, the way the left thumb bent slightly outward at the first joint from an old injury. Her father's eyes, which were looking up at her now from a face that had not been shaved in 3 weeks. Looking at her from the face of a beggar at a village market junction. She said his name very quietly. He looked at her. For one moment, a single suspended moment, neither of them moved. Then Kioma covered her mouth with both hands, and the sound that came from her was not a word. It was something older than words. Adana saw him. She had been looking at her sister's face and had turned to follow her gaze, and she saw the man at the market junction, and her face went through recognition in the same fractional second, and she said, "Papa," in a voice that carried everything. Eber was already moving. She had recognized him before the others spoke. She had the sharpest eyes in the family, always had, and she was already crossing the distance to him when her sisters found their voices, and she crouched down in front of him at the market junction, this man in his worn clothes with his cup, and she said, "Papa, Papa, what is this?" He looked at his youngest daughter's face. He looked at all three of them, and for a moment, for the first time in the 3 weeks of this journey, his face did what it had been carefully not doing for 3 weeks. It broke. Not dramatically. He was Chief Emeka Ogwike, and Chief Emeka Ogwike did not do things dramatically, but his face did something specific. The careful architecture of it relaxed into something rawer, something that was simply a father seeing his children and being seen by them, and the gap between his public face and his private one was suddenly very small. "My daughters," he said. His voice was quieter than they had ever heard it. Kioma crossed the distance. She took his hands, both of them, the way she had held his hands when she was a small girl, and she said, "Come home, Papa. You come home right now." "The house is small," he said, staying in character partly, testing to the end. "The house is plenty," Adana said, and she had taken his arm and was already helping him stand. "We will manage. We always manage." "You don't have to beg," Eber said, and there was something fierce in it, the fierceness of the youngest who has always been protective of the people she loves despite having less experience than all of them. "You will never sit here and beg. Come home." He stood. He was, he realized, genuinely moved, not performing being moved, not simulating it for the test. The sight of his daughters' faces, the specific combination of shock and grief and love and the immediate, unconditional welcome, "Come home, Papa. We will manage," was doing something to the inside of his chest that he had not anticipated. He had designed the test to see how they responded to a man with nothing. He had not fully anticipated how it would feel to receive what they were giving. They walked him home, all three of them, surrounding him, Kioma on one side and Adana on the other and Eber slightly ahead, turning to look back at him every few steps as if she needed to verify he was still there. They brought him into the small house. He sat at their kitchen table, the kitchen table of the 3-room village house that he had given them when he said he had nothing else. Kioma made tea immediately, without asking. Adana had food cooking within 20 minutes. Eber pulled a chair close to his and sat beside him with her hand on his arm and asked him questions, practical questions. The law student always going first to the facts. How long had he been on the road? Where had he slept? Had he eaten that day? Was he physically well? He answered her questions, partially truthfully and partially in character. He was well enough, he said. He had been managing. Kioma set the tea in front of him. She looked at his face, at the stubble, at the worn clothes. "We go to work on Monday," she said. "We are not rich, but we have enough. You live here, Papa. This is your house." "It's the house I gave you," he said. "Then you gave it to us and now we give it back," she said simply. "That is how family works." He sat with his tea and his daughters and the small house and the particular feeling of being, for the first time in a long time, in a place that was simply and completely home. He stayed. He stayed in the village with his daughters for 2 months, living as himself, not as the beggar that character was retired, but as a man without the chief Emeka Ogwike infrastructure. He wore simple clothes. He ate what they cooked. He helped where he could. He fixed things around the house that needed fixing. He walked to the market and he sat in the church and he met his daughter's neighbors who had no idea who he was and who received him with the ordinary courtesy extended to an ordinary man. He watched his daughters. He watched Kioma with her students. She had transferred to a village school that was no better resource than her Enugu one, and she invested herself in it with the same complete attention. He watched Adana at the clinic, on an evening when she didn't know he was observing, with a patient who was frightened and who she stayed with past her finished time because the patient needed her. He watched Eber at the kitchen table in the evenings, studying, focused, the law book spread before her, arguing points out loud when she encountered something that required arguing. He also watched their boyfriends come and go, Daniel arriving on weekends and sleeping on the sitting room couch, and never once giving any indication that the situation was beneath him. Kelechi fixing things and being quietly excellent. Tobina video calling every night and showing up physically when he could and being unambiguously himself throughout. He watched all of this. And then in the 3rd month, the sons arrived. They had not come to see their father. This needed to be said clearly, because the sons arrived at the village house in Anambra with a particular energy that announced its purpose before they opened their mouths. They had come because they had heard, through some channel, that their father was there, and they had come because the situation was not going the way they had expected, and they needed to recalibrate. Ikena arrived first alone, Tulu being long since gone in a rented car because the family cars had been removed from his access. He pulled up to the compound gate of the small house and sat in the car for a moment, looking at it, before getting out. The house was small. This registered on his face in a particular way, not grief at his father's reduced circumstances, but the specific discomfort of someone encountering a reality that requires them to admit that things are more serious than they had believed. He came in. Emeka was sitting in the sitting room. Ikena took in his father's appearance, the simple clothes, the continued absence of the accoutrements of his usual life, and something moved across his face that was difficult to read. It was not the expression of a son seeing his father in difficulty. It was something more self-directed. "Papa," he said. "Ikena," his father said. There was a pause. "The situation is really this bad," Ikena said. "This is where I am," his father said. Ikena looked around the sitting room. He looked at the modest furniture, the small windows, the generator on the floor by the wall, and the business, completely gone. "I am here," his father said simply. Ikena sat down. He talked about himself for a while, his own difficulties, the loss of his salary, Toulouse's departure, which he mentioned with an anger that was clearly unresolved. He talked about plans he had, things he was trying to do, the contacts he was pursuing. He did not, in the 30 minutes he sat with his father, ask his father how he was. Not once. Emeka sat across from his son and listened, and noted this absence with the precision of a man taking inventory. Emeka arrived the next day. He came with the particular energy that was always his, filling the room immediately, louder than necessary, his presence announcing itself before his words did. He looked at the house and said, to no one in particular, "So this is really what it's come to." It was said in the way of someone commenting on a situation that was happening to them, rather than someone whose father was in it. He sat with his father. He also talked about himself, Precious's departure, which he was clearly more damaged by than he was willing to admit, the financial situation, the contacts he was pursuing. He said things about the family business that suggested he believed decisions had been made badly, that things had been mismanaged, that the current situation was the result of errors rather than circumstance. He did not ask his father how he was either. What he did say, and this was the sentence that Emeka, who had been watching and nodding for 2 months, registered as the most important data point of the entire exercise, was this: "Papa, look at you. You are a waste of this whole plan. We built something, and what do we have now? Nothing. You sitting in this village like a common person. Is this what you want for yourself, for us?" He said it with the confidence of someone who believes the words are helping, someone who genuinely does not understand that the words are the last answer to the test. Kioma, who was in the kitchen and who heard this, came to the doorway. She looked at her brother. "Eme," she said very quietly. He turned to her. "Be careful," she said. "That is your father you are speaking to." Eme looked at her with the expression of a man who has been managing his sister's images with his father for 8 months and who does not expect to be corrected by one of them. "I'm talking to Papa," he said. "I know," Kioma said, "and I'm asking you to do it with respect." There was a silence. Ikena, who had been present for Eme's words, said nothing. He looked at the floor. Emeka looked at his eldest daughter in the kitchen doorway, and he thought about the morning at the market junction when she had said, "Come home, Papa, this is your house." Then he stood. "I want to speak to all 5 of you," he said. "Come, sit." They sat in the sitting room of the small village house. All 5 of them. The 3 daughters on one side, Kioma beside her father, Adana beside Kioma, Eber on the end with her feet tucked under her, still and watching. The 2 sons on the other side, Ikena in the chair, Ime on the arm of the chair because the couch was full, both of them with the contained energy of people who are present but not entirely comfortable being present. Emeka stood. He was wearing simple clothes, the kind he had been wearing for 2 months. He had shaved, finally, the day after his daughters brought him home from the market junction, and his face was itself again. But he stood differently than he had stood in the Victoria Island sitting room when he made his announcement about the business. He stood the way he had learned to stand long ago, the way of a man who had eaten sand at 17 and had built something from nothing and who had, in the process, become entirely unconcerned with performing. He looked at each of his children. He let the silence settle for a moment. Then he spoke. "I want to tell you all a story," he said. "The story is about a man who was born poor and became rich through 30 years of work. Not luck, not connection. Work and patience and the lessons that only failure can teach you, because failure is the only school that gives you the curriculum you actually need." He paused. This man had 5 children. He loved all 5 of them with everything he had. He gave them education and safety and opportunity because he had none of those things himself when he was young, and he understood their value. He thought that giving his children these things was the right thing to do. He thought it was enough. Another pause. He was wrong. Giving children what you did not have does not give them what the absence gave you. It gives them the thing. It does not give them the experience of living without the thing, which is where the character is built. He looked at his sons. Aikina was very still. Ime was looking at a point on the floor just in front of his feet. This man also had a problem. His sons came to him with stories about his daughters, careful stories, small stories, the kind of stories that a man cannot easily check because they are about private conversations and expressions and intentions. The stories said that the daughters were not what they appeared, that they were calculating, that their loyalty was conditional. He saw Kiyoma's face change, not with surprise, with something that was past surprise, something that was understanding something it had been trying to understand. He listened to these stories, Emeka continued. He did not believe them fully, but he could not dismiss them fully, because the stories came from his sons who he also loved, and love makes you give weight to what the loved person says. He looked at his daughters now. So he made a test. He created a situation in which his children would believe that everything he had was gone, and then he waited to see who they were when there was nothing to be gained from being kind to him. The sitting room was very quiet. Eber's mouth had opened slightly. She was looking at her father with the expression of a lawyer who has just heard a fact that reorganizes all the other facts around it. Adana was looking at him with something between wonder and emotion. Kiyoma had gone very still. Emeka crossed to the chair and sat down. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Aikina," he said. His eldest son looked up. 8 months ago, you came to my study and told me that Kiyoma was speaking to a lawyer about my estate. You said you were concerned. You said you were only telling me because you loved me. Aikina said nothing. Was it true? Emeka asked. The silence stretched. It was something I heard, Aikina said finally. I may have, he stopped. You may have what? His father asked. Another silence. I may have made it more significant than it was, Aikina said. The words came out with the specific difficulty of a man admitting something he had been avoiding for a long time. Emeka nodded slowly. Kiyoma spoke to a lawyer, he said. I found this out when I made inquiries of my own. She spoke to a lawyer about updating her will, because she and Daniel are engaged and she wanted to ensure that her personal savings from her teacher's salary, not from me, were properly arranged. Kiyoma said nothing. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was not consulting about my estate, Emeka said. She was being a responsible adult managing her own affairs. He turned to Ime. And you told me Adana had been overheard speaking about me in a negative way to a friend. Ime was very still. What Adana had actually said, Emeka continued, was that she was worried about me, that she thought I was working too hard, that she wished I would slow down. He looked at his son. Your source was the same friend she had the conversation with, who told you what Adana said and who described her tone as critical when it was in fact concerned. You knew this. You did not correct it. Ime said nothing. And the photograph of Eber with a property consultant, Emeka said, turning to look at his youngest daughter with something that was almost apology. Eber, who was with? Eber said, Tobina's cousin, who works in real estate. We were at a birthday party. A birthday party, Emeka repeated. He sat with this for a moment. You built a picture, he said to his sons. Brick by brick, not with lies exactly. Each story had something in it that could be held up as a foundation, but with selection and shading and the particular art of telling a truth in a way that makes it function as a lie. You did this because you wanted me to believe your sisters were not what they appeared, and you wanted me to believe this because it was in your financial interest for my daughters to be less in my trust than they were. Aikina opened his mouth. Don't, his father said, not unkindly, but with absolute finality. He turned to his daughters. Kiyoma, he said. She looked at him, When the story came out that the business had failed, when you heard that I had nothing, what was the first thing you asked me?" She did not need to think. "Are you all right?" she said. Not what happened to the money, not what happened to the business, not what I had left. "No," she said. "Adana," he said. She was crying quietly. She did not wipe her face. "When I was at the market junction and you saw me, when you saw me sitting with a cup in my hand in those clothes, what did you say?" "Come home," she said. Not "what are you doing here?" Not "how did this happen?" "Come home," she repeated. "Eber," he said. His youngest daughter, the law student, the arguer. The fierce one was looking at him with an expression that contained everything she was. The sharpness and the warmth and the specific quality of someone who has been thinking for a long time and has just received the final fact that completes the picture. "You sat in front of me at the market," he said, "in front of a man you believed had nothing, and what did you say?" She did not look away from him. "I said you would never sit there and beg. I said come home." "You didn't ask about the estate." "No." "You didn't ask what I had left." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "You said, 'What do you need, Papa? Tell me exactly what you need and I will find a way.'" Eber pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry in this moment. She was going to stay clear. "You passed," he said simply. "All three of you, not because you did something extraordinary, because you were exactly what I always believed you to be. You were yourselves, and yourselves is enough, more than enough." He reached into the pocket of his simple shirt and removed a folded document. He placed it on the coffee table between them. "This is the current structure of the Ogwike estate," he said. "The business did not fail. I am still Chief Emeka Ogwike. I have been for 2 months in this village with my daughters while my sons did not visit." A beat. "My son's portion of the estate was contingent on the test," he said. "Not removed entirely. They are my sons and I love them and that does not change. But the primary stewardship of what I have built, the governance, the management, the majority of the shares, goes to my 3 daughters." He looked at Kioma. "You will chair the board of Ogwike Integrated Solutions. You have the mind for it. You will be trained. You will be supported. And you will do it properly or you will tell me you don't want it and I will find another way." Kioma was very still. "Adana," he said, "there is a healthcare fund in the estate, a foundation I have been thinking about for some time, access to quality healthcare for low-income families. You will lead it." Adana made a sound that was not quite a word. "Eber," he said, "you will finish your law degree, and when you finish, you will be the family's legal counsel. The company needs a lawyer who will not tell me what I want to hear. I expect you to tell me what is true." Eber said, "I will." He looked at his sons. They were sitting very still. Ikena's jaw was tight. Emel was looking at his father with an expression that was more complex than it had been. There was embarrassment in it, and something that was struggling to get past the embarrassment, something that might, eventually, become something better. "Ikena," he said, "I am not removing you from the company. You have skills and you have the name and both of those things can be used properly. But you will not be given authority that you have not earned. And you will earn it under your sister's governance, which means you will work for Kioma. If this is unacceptable to you, the door is open and you are always my son regardless." Ikena said nothing. "Ime," he said, "the same applies. The path back is through honesty and through work. I know what you are capable of when you apply yourself. I have seen it. The question is whether you choose to apply it." Ime looked at his father. His usual energy was absent. What remained without it was younger and less defended. "Papa," he said quietly. "Yes," his father said. "I'm sorry." It came out with the specific difficulty of a word that a person has been carrying for a long time and has not known how to put down. "I'm sorry for what I said, about you being a waste, about—" He stopped. He started again. "I was scared. When the money stopped and Precious left and I didn't have, I was scared and I said things that. I know, his father said. It doesn't excuse it, Emma said. No, his father agreed. It doesn't, but I understand it. He looked at all 5 of them, his children, all 5 of them in the sitting room of the small village house. I want to tell you one more thing, he said. I want to tell you about sand. And he told them. For the first time in his life, he told them about the sand in his uncle's compound when he was 17, about the 2 weeks of reduced meals, about the discovery that fine pale sand on the tongue created a sensation that was not fullness but was at least occupation, about carrying that reference point for 45 years as the bottom measurement against which everything else was calibrated. He told them about the warehouse in 1997, about losing everything, about the Mushin room, about their mother leaving, which cost him more than the business had. He told them about standing in the single room after she left with the children and choosing to go find work. He told them about all of it, the years of building, the slow accumulation, the particular education of doing something hard over a very long time. When he finished, the sitting room was very quiet. Kioma said, "Why didn't you tell us this before?" "Because I thought I was giving you something by protecting you from it," he said. "I was wrong about that." Adana said, "The sand, Papa." She was still crying quietly. "You ate sand." "I did," he said. "And then I ate everything else that came after. All of it tasted better for knowing what the other option was." 3 months after the sitting room conversation in the Anambra village house, Ogwike Integrated Solutions issued a formal announcement. The announcement was that the company had reorganized its board structure. The new chairperson was Ms. Kioma Ogwike, 30 years old, who would be transitioning from her role as a primary school teacher to lead the board of one of Nigeria's most significant real estate and logistics companies. The announcement noted that she would be supported by an experienced executive team and would be undergoing formal governance training over the next 18 months. The business press covered the story. Several outlets expressed surprise. A wealthy man appointing his teacher daughter over his sons who worked in the business was not a common narrative. Kioma read the coverage from her new office in Victoria Island. She had moved, reluctantly and with significant adjustment, to Lagos for the role, though she maintained her connection to Enugu and to teaching in every way she could. She read the articles with the practical eye of someone who knew the real story and found the narrative the press had constructed both accurate and incomplete. She called her father. "They say it's a surprise," she said. "Let them be surprised," he said. "The company does not care about their surprise. The company cares about the work." "Papa," she said, "am I going to be good at this?" "No," he said. A pause. "Not at first," he continued. "At first you are going to make mistakes and learn from them, which is how everyone who becomes good at something becomes good at it. The question is not whether you are going to be good. The question is whether you are going to stay when it is difficult." "I am," she said. "Then you will be good," he said, "eventually." The healthcare foundation took longer to establish. These things required more infrastructure. Adana spent 6 months working on the structure, the legal framework, the funding model, the operational plan. She approached it with the same thoroughness she brought to nursing, the thoroughness of someone who understands that the details matter because the details are what people actually receive. The foundation launched at the end of its first year with 3 clinics in low-income communities in Lagos and Enugu, offering subsidized care. Adana was its director. She continued working clinically part-time because she was not ready to stop being at the bedside, because the people on the administrative side of healthcare could sometimes forget, without the bedside, what they were actually doing. Kelechi moved to Lagos with her. He found a position at a hospital in Surulere. Their engagement was announced at a family gathering at the Victoria Island house, which Emeka had not sold, this having been part of the performance. and it was received with the warmth of something that had been inevitable to everyone who had been paying attention. Eber finished her law degree with a first-class result that was greeted by her father with the specific pride of a man who had invested in something and seen the investment validated not just financially but completely. She joined the company's legal team, initially junior, and within 18 months had become the most sought-after internal counsel by virtue of the quality that her father had identified. She would not tell him what he wanted to hear. She told him what was true. This was rare and therefore extraordinarily valuable. Tobina's company, after 18 months of the sustained uncertainty that characterizes early-stage technology businesses, landed a contract with a Lagos logistics company that put it on the right side of viable. He was careful with the money, reinvested properly, and built slowly. He proposed to Eber on a Tuesday evening in his apartment in Lagos. Not a dramatic proposal, no restaurant, no audience, just the two of them at his kitchen table after dinner, him reaching across and taking her hand and asking, and she said yes before he finished the question. He told her later, "You didn't let me finish." "I knew the ending," she said. "Why wait?" The sons rebuilt. Ikena, under Kioma's governance, proved what his father had always suspected, that the intelligence and the charm were real, that under the right structure that required genuine contribution rather than rewarding proximity to wealth, he could produce work of genuine value. He was not comfortable working under his sister, initially. There were conversations between them that were difficult in the particular way of siblings, renegotiating their relationship through the medium of a professional environment. But Kioma was patient with him in the way that good leaders are patient, not endlessly, not regardless of accountability, but with the specific patience of someone who believes a person can become better than they are currently being. She had learned this in classrooms. Children who behaved badly were rarely bad. They were usually scared or confused or had been given the wrong information about what the rules were. The job was to reclarify the rules and hold them consistently and see what happened. Ikena, in the second year, delivered a project that was genuinely excellent, a logistics partnership with a manufacturer in Kano that increased efficiency and generated revenue that exceeded projections. He brought it to Kioma's desk, and she reviewed it and she said, "This is good work." He said, "I know." She looked at him. "Sorry," he said, "I mean thank you." "Don't thank me," she said. "I'm telling you the work is good because the work is good. Keep doing good work." He did. Imez's path was slower and less linear. It was more like him, which is to say it contained more detours and more moments of resistance and more conversations with his father that were difficult before they were useful. But it was real. He found in the logistics side of the business, the part that was most operationally intense, the part that required constant problem-solving and improvisation, something that his particular energy was suited to. He was not, it turned out, a man for the office. He was a man for the field. He also eventually met someone. Her name was Adiz, and she was a supply chain manager at a manufacturing company in Kaduna. And she had met Imez when he was visiting a supplier, and she had been visiting the same supplier, and they had both been kept waiting in the same reception area for 40 minutes. She was not impressed by his family name. She had heard of Ogwike Integrated Solutions, but she had not heard of Imez Ogwike specifically, and when he mentioned the connection she had said, "Oh, so you work in your family's company." "In a manner of speaking," he said. "What manner?" He had to think about the answer. "In the manner of someone who is trying to earn his place in it," he said finally. She had looked at him with the specific assessment of a supply chain manager, practical, penetrating, disinclined toward bullshit. "Good answer," she said. She came home with him to Lagos after 3 months, and she met his family, and she was direct with all of them, which they respected. And she was particularly direct with his father, who she met at a family dinner, and who she told plainly that she thought the company's northern logistics operations were underperforming relative to their potential. Chief Emeka Ogwike had looked at this woman across the dinner table. "Tell me more," he said. She told him more. He hired her as a consultant 2 months later. Eme had told his father afterward, "You hired my girlfriend without asking me." "She is qualified," his father said. "I know she's qualified, she's excellent, Would you prefer I hadn't?" his father asked. Eme thought about it. "No," he said. "Good," his father said. And the family rebuilt. Not without difficulty. Nothing real is built without difficulty. There were conversations that took months to have properly and things that needed to be said more than once before they were genuinely received. Ikena's relationship with his sisters changed gradually, the way relationships change when the underlying dynamics change. Slowly, with occasional regression, but consistently in the right direction. Eme apologized to his father properly, not in the village sitting room where the first apology had been delivered in the shock of the revelation, but later, privately, in his father's study in Victoria Island, with the specific detail that a proper apology requires. He said what he had done. He said why he had done it. He said he understood that understanding the why did not change the what. His father received the apology and offered his own, because there were things Emeka had done that required accounting for, things about the way he had raised his sons, the insulation from difficulty, the financial provision that had not been matched by the harder provision of consequences. "I gave you everything," he said. "I should have given you less. I should have made you build some of it yourself. That is on me." Eme said, "You were trying to give us what you didn't have." "Yes," his father said, "and in doing so I failed to give you what I did have, which was the experience of not having." They sat with this for a while in the study. Outside, the Lagos evening was settling in. Somewhere in the house, Kioma was on a call, Adana was making dinner, Eber was reading. The family was in the house. All of them for a weekend gathering that had become a regular thing. This bringing together of 5 children and their partners and their father in the Victoria Island house. This deliberate maintenance of something that had been almost lost. Emeka sat in his study in the evening, and he thought about sand. He thought about the 17-year-old in his uncle's compound, who had found that the fine pale sand of the yard, held on the tongue, created a sensation that was not fullness, but was occupation. He had told his children, he had told them everything, and something had happened in the telling that he had not anticipated. The story had become shared. It was no longer only his reference point. It was theirs too. Kioma had told him that she thought about it sometimes, the sand, when she was having a difficult day in the boardroom, that she thought about it not as a limit but as a depth. Here is how deep the foundation goes, it said. Here is what the ground below the ground looks like. You come from this. You come from this. He heard his daughter's voices in the hallway and his son's voices joining them, and the sound of the house being full with people who were his people. And he sat with it the way he sat with everything that mattered, quietly, without performance, with the complete attention of a man who had learned, through the full catalog of what life could take away, exactly what was worth being present for. This was worth being present for. There is a house in Victoria Island. It is a good house, not ostentatious, not performing its wealth, but solid and real and built with the money of 30 years of work that began in a motion room and passed through a warehouse flood and a wife who left in a room with 5 strangers and sand on the tongue of a 17-year-old who had decided, without anyone to tell him it was possible, that he was not going to die this way. In that house on Sunday evenings, there is noise. The noise of 5 children and their partners, and beginning to accumulate now, the first grandchildren, Kioma's first, born in the 2nd year of her board tenure, a girl with her mother's steadiness and her grandfather's eyes. Adana's first, a boy who arrived with the particular energy of someone who plans to be everywhere at once. And Tobina and Eber's announcement, most recently, that they are expecting, which Eber delivered at a Sunday dinner by placing a scanned photograph on the table in front of her father without preamble and waiting for him to understand what he was looking at. He understood. He looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he looked at his youngest daughter. "You are going to be an excellent mother," he said. "I'm going to be a terrifying one," she said. "I'm going to hold them to the highest possible standards." "Good," he said. "That's what they'll need." The house on Sunday evenings contains all of this. The noise and the food and the arguments and the laughter and the particular texture of a family that has been tested and has come through the testing changed in the ways that matter. There is also, in Emeka's study on a shelf above his desk, a small glass jar. It contains sand. Fine, pale sand from the yard of a compound in Ennui, where a 17-year-old boy once found a way to feel less empty. He put it there 5 years ago when he told his children the story. He had gone back to Ennui to find the compound. It was still there, different now, a different family in it, and he had taken a small amount of the sand from the edge of the yard, and he had put it in the jar and he had brought it home. Not as a monument to suffering, not as a thing to be displayed, as a reference point, as the physical form of the thing he had learned and that his children now also knew, that here is the bottom and it is survivable, and what you build after you survive it is built on the knowledge that you survived it. The jar sits on the shelf. The house is full of noise. His daughters are building. His sons are learning. His grandchildren are arriving. And Chief Emeka Ogwike, the boy who ate sand, the man who rebuilt from ash, the father who disguised himself as a beggar to find out what his children were made of, sits in his study on Sunday evenings and listens to the sound of everything he built. And he is, in the full and complete meaning of the word, home. If you are watching this right now and you have a parent who tested you, not with a disguise, not with a plan, but in the ordinary daily ways that parents test their children, by needing things and seeing what you do about it, go and call them. Right now, after this video. Tell them you are there. Not for the money, not for the house, not for what they have accumulated. For them. That is the test, and passing it is simpler than you might think. You just have to show up. This has been Tribal Tales Hub. If this story moved you, if the sand jar and the market junction and the sitting room and everything between them touched something real, like this video right now, subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub. Ring the notification bell. We tell the stories that matter about love and loyalty and what people are made of when the performance is stripped away. Comment below, have you ever been tested by someone you love? Did you pass? Tell us. The comment section is yours. Share this video with your siblings. Share it with your children. Share it with anyone who needs to remember that the most important wealth is not the kind that can be taken away. This is Tribal Tales Hub. We will see you in the next story.